Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are diving into section 17, which is reader response criticism. Let's step into a critical approach that places you, the reader, right at the center of the literary stage, reader response criticism. Instead of treating the text as a sealed vault holding a single hidden truth, this school of thought sees reading as a living conversation. Meaning isn't simply found, it's made. It happens in that electric space between the text's words and the reader's mind. Wolfgang Iser, in The Implied Reader, suggests that every work silently calls forth a certain kind of reader, someone the text imagines will fill in its gap. Hans Robert Jauss expands this with his reception theory, framing literature as a dialogue between the moment of its creation and the reader's historical horizon of expectation. Stanley goes further, reminding us that we never read alone. We belong to interpretive communities whose shared beliefs and cultural codes guide our understanding. Norman Holland adds a psychological dimension, showing how personal identity shapes interpretation, while Louise Rosenblatt makes a vital distinction. Sometimes we read for information efferent reading, and sometimes for experience itself aesthetic reading. Together, these thinkers tell us something radical. The text is not a closed object with one ultimate meaning. It is a spark. Its light depends on who you are, when you read it, and what you bring to the encounter. Let's meet Louise Rosenblatt, born in 1904 and living an extraordinary life until 2005, a scholar whose work permanently transformed how we think about reading. An American professor and one of the most influential voices in literary pedagogy, Rosenblatt championed the idea that reading is not a one-way street from author to audience, but a vibrant, living exchange. While teaching English literature at Barnard College, she began to notice something remarkable. Two students could read the exact same text, yet emerge with entirely different understandings. Why? Because each reader brings their own life experiences, emotions, and cultural background into the act of reading. Influenced by the progressive philosophy of John Dewey, the pragmatism of Charles Sanders Peirce, and the psychological insights of William James, Rosenblatt came to see reading as an active, reciprocal process. Her first major contribution came with Literature as Exploration, published in 1938 for the Commission on Human Relations. In it, she argued that literature can cultivate empathy, nurture social awareness, and even foster personal transformation. But it was 4 decades later, in 1978, that she delivered her defining statement in The Reader, the text, the poem, the transactional theory of the literary work. Here, she borrowed Dewey's term transaction to describe a mutual shaping of meaning where neither the text nor the reader holds absolute authority. In her vision, the poem is not a static artifact but the outcome of this dynamic interaction crafted anew with every reading. For Rosenblatt, reading was never passive reception, it was creation. Her work has reshaped literature classrooms around the world, inspiring educators to value students' interpretations as vital to understanding the text itself. And so her legacy lives on in every reader who realizes that the meaning of a book isn't simply found, it's made. Let's step into the world of Maya Howard Abrams, born in 1912 and living until 2015, a towering figure in literary criticism whose work continues to shape how we read, teach, and think about literature. Abrams was not just a critic. He was an architect of ideas, a scholar who could distill centuries of thought into a single unforgettable metaphor. In his groundbreaking book, The Mirror and the Lamp, published in 1953, Abrams traced a profound shift in literary theory from the cool, reflective ideals of the Enlightenment to the glowing, imaginative vision of Romanticism. For the 18th century, literature was a mirror, a rational, measured reflection of the external world, perfectly in step with neoclassical ideals of order and harmony. But Romanticism changed everything. Here, the writer was no longer simply reflecting reality, but transforming it like a lamp casting light outward from within, fueled by the poet's own imagination, emotion, and inner life. This metaphor of mirror and lamp became one of the most enduring frameworks in modern literary studies, helping us understand how art moved from objective representation to deeply subjective creation. But Abrams' influence extended far beyond theory. As the general editor of the Norton Anthology of English Literature, he shaped the literary canon for generations of students and scholars. His introduction to the Romantic period, spanning 1798 to 1832, was itself a masterclass in contextual criticism. He examined figures like Lord Byron, connecting the concept of Byronism to Nietzsche's Übermensch, and explored the life of Percy Bysshe Shelley, noting with poignancy, "The tragedy of Shelley's short life was that, intending always the best, he brought disaster and suffering upon himself and those he loved." Abrams' legacy is twofold. He gave us the metaphors, the mirror, and the lamp that crystallized the evolution of literary thought, and he curated the texts that continue to define the study of English literature. In both theory and canon, his imprint is indelible. Anding why? Let's turn our attention to Hans Robert Jauss. Born in 1921 and passing in 1997, a German literary scholar whose work transformed the way we think about the relationship between literature, history, and the reader. While traditional criticism often focused on the author or the text as the ultimate source of meaning, Jauss boldly shifted the spotlight to the audience, making the reader an active participant in the creation of literary history. Drawing on Hans-Georg Gadamer's hermeneutics, Jauss developed what we now call reception theory, a framework that examines literature as an ongoing conversation between text and reader across time. For him, literature was never a silent, isolated monument. It was a living dialogue, constantly reshaped by the expectations, values, and experiences of its readers. Central to his thinking is the concept of the horizon of expectation, the web of cultural norms, literary conventions, and historical experiences that shape a reader's understanding at any given moment. A work that challenges this horizon can create shock, controversy, or even cultural transformation, while one that fits neatly within it may pass with quiet acceptance. Jauss insisted that a text's meaning is never fixed. The same novel, poem, or play will speak differently to different generations because the horizons of expectation are always shifting. By tracing these changes in reception, Jauss offered a method for weaving the reader's role directly into literary history, bridging the gap between criticism and historical study. His legacy reminds us of something profound. A work of literature does not simply survive across centuries, it lives anew each time it is read. Let's now explore the ideas of Wolfgang Iser, born in 1926 and passing in 2007, a German literary scholar who, alongside Hans Robert Jauss, co-founded the Constance School of Reception Theory. While Jauss emphasized the historical dimension of how literature is received, Iser turned our attention to the intimate moment of reading itself. For Iser, a literary work does not exist as a fixed, self-contained object. Instead, it comes alive in the space between the written text and the act of reading. In his landmark book, The Implied Reader, published in 1974, he introduced the concept of the implied reader, a kind of hypothetical figure built into every text. This implied reader is not an actual person, but a set of reading skills, expectations, and interpretive strategies that the text quietly assumes its audience will bring. Iser outlined 4 perspectives that shape this reading experience: the voice of the narrator, the presence of the characters, the unfolding of the plot, and the implied reader themselves. Each of these elements guides us, but never tells us everything. And that's the key to his theory. Texts are full of gaps or blanks that the reader must actively fill. This is where reading becomes a creative act. In The Act of Reading, published in 1978, Iser refined this idea into a systematic framework, showing how texts operate as acts of communication shaped by their cultural context. For him, the beauty of reading lies in this interplay. The text constrains meaning through its design, but the reader breathes life into it through interpretation. Iser's legacy is a reminder that reading is never passive. It is a dance between what the text offers and what the reader brings. Let's meet Norman Holland, born in 1927 and passing in 2017, an American literary critic who reshaped the way we think about reading by blending psychoanalysis with reader response theory. His big idea? Reading isn't just about the text, it's about you. Holland argued that when we read, we bring along our entire psychological makeup, our identity, our unconscious desires, our memories, even our hidden fears. The text is not a static object, it's a stage where our mind performs. He called this approach psychological reader response theory. According to Holland, we start with unconscious fantasies and then, through defense mechanisms, reshape them into a conscious interpretation. In other words, we don't just read a story, we live it in a way that reflects who we are. In Poems and Persons, first published in 1973 and revised in 2000, he explained how both writers and readers use literature to express and reconstruct their own identities. Holland compared this process to a musical theme and variations. The identity theme stays constant, but the way it plays out shifts depending on the context. His 5 readers reading from 1975 put this theory to the test. He asked 5 university students to read short stories and respond using psychoanalytic free association. The result, each reading was wildly different, shaped far more by the reader's personality than by the text itself. Even in Laughing a Psychology of Humor from 1982, Holland extended the same idea. Our sense of humor, like our interpretation of literature, reflects our identity. Before this psychological turn, Holland's earlier works, the first modern comedies in 1959 and the dynamics of literary criticism in 1968, were rooted in new criticism but already hinted at psychoanalysis. Over time, his research convinced him that reading is never neutral. Literature, for Holland, is a mirror, and every reader sees a different reflection, one shaped by the self they bring to the page. Let's turn to Harold Bloom. Born in 1930 and passing in 2019, a towering presence in literary criticism and one of the most recognizable voices in the English-speaking world. Bloom was the Sterling Professor of Humanities at Yale University, educated at Yale, Cambridge, and Cornell, and the author of more than 50 books, over 40 of them devoted to literary criticism, alongside works on religion and even a single novel. In the late 20th century, Bloom became a defining figure, known for combining close reading with sweeping historical and aesthetic judgments. He was central to the influential 1979 volume Deconstruction and Criticism, co-authored with Paul D. Mann, Jacques Derrida, Geoffrey Hartman, and J. Hillis Miller, a landmark that helped bring deconstruction into the Anglo-American critical conversation. Bloom's own works, such as Poetry and Repression, delved into how poets wrestle with their literary ancestors, a struggle that became the heart of his most famous theory, the anxiety of influence. In The Brief Compass, he guided readers through the history, language, and social role of poetry with equal attention to canonical and lesser-known voices. And in The Visionary Company, he argued that the great Romantic poets, Blake, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, and Keats, formed a unified imaginative tradition, rich in visionary symbolism and deeply engaged with their cultural moment. At the core of Bloom's critical life was a passionate defense of the Western canon and of aesthetic value itself. He resisted the idea that literature should be read primarily through political or relativistic lenses, insisting instead on the enduring power of artistic greatness. Nowhere is Bloom's originality clearer than in his 1973 work, The Anxiety of Influence. Here, he offers what he calls a revisionist or antithetical approach to literary criticism, built on the claim that no great poet can escape tradition. This condition is both a gift and a burden. A poet's creativity is shaped and shadowed by the work of predecessors. Drawing on the ancient Lucretian term clinamen, meaning an unpredictable atomic swerve, Bloom redefines it as the poet's first creative deviation from a precursor's work, the moment originality begins to emerge. Bloom describes 6 revisionary ratios, 6 strategies by which strong poets engage their predecessors. First, clean amend the swerve, a creative redirection. Second, tessera, a completion in antithesis. Third, kenosis, self-emptying to break from influence. Fourth, daemonization, seeking a counter-sublime beyond the precursor's vision. Fifth, ascesis, a self-purging that narrows and focuses the poet's scope. And sixth, apophthades, the haunting return of the dead when the precursor's voice seems to speak again through the new poet. For Bloom, originality is not born in isolation. It emerges from a tense, ongoing, often agonistic dialogue with the past. In his view, only a few strong poets survive the struggle, while the rest are inevitably overshadowed by those who came before. Let's now look at Stanley Fish, born in 1938, an American literary theorist whose work reshaped the landscape of reader response criticism and postmodern literary theory. Fish challenged the traditional assumption that a text's meaning resides entirely within the work itself. Instead, he placed the reader at the center, arguing that meaning is actively constructed through the reading process. His breakthrough came in 1967 with Surprised by Sin, the reader in Paradise Lost. In the seminal study, Fish argued that Milton's great epic is not simply a retelling of the biblical story of Adam and Eve, it is also about the reader's own moral and spiritual journey. As we move through the poem, we follow the perspectives of Adam, Eve, and even Satan, often sharing in their temptations and rationalizations. This makes us complicit in their choices, forcing a moment of self-recognition. In this way, Paradise Lost becomes a moral testing ground. Its subject is not just the fall of man, but the fallibility of the reader. Fish expanded this idea in 1980 with Is There a Text in This Class? The Authority of Interpretive Communities. Here, he tackled the central question, where does meaning come from? His answer neither solely from the author nor from the text intrinsic form, but from interpretive communities. These are social and linguistic collectives whose members share common reading conventions, assumptions, and strategies. According to Fish, every reader belongs to at least one such community, defined perhaps by nationality, profession, religion, academic discipline, or subculture. Within these communities, shared norms and discourse conventions guide our interpretation, making some readings feel natural while keeping others outside the bounds of acceptability. Meaning, then, is not limitless subjectivity. It is socially shaped, context-bound, and community-governed. By integrating linguistic philosophy, hermeneutics, and reception theory, Fish bridged the gap between the solitary act of reading and the social frameworks that shape how we read. His theories continue to influence literary criticism, classroom pedagogy, and debates over textual authority in the postmodern era. Now we turn to David Bleich, an American literary theorist who took reader response criticism in a distinctly subjective direction. Bleich is best remembered for developing what's known as the Bleich heuristic, a teaching method that invites students to share their own, often shifting, interpretations of a text. In Bleich's view, there is no single fixed meaning hidden inside a literary work waiting to be uncovered. Instead, meaning is born in the act of reading it exist only through the interpretations that readers create. The text on the page is static, but its significance comes alive only when engaged by the reader's mind. His approach places him alongside figures like Norman Holland in the Freudian branch of reader response theory, where the emphasis is on the psychological processes at work during reading. Here, literature becomes a mirror reflecting the reader's inner life, shaped by their emotions, memories, and unconscious desires. For Bleich, criticism is never a solitary act. It is a communal process. Subjective responses are shared, debated, and refined within a group, making interpretation a dynamic and evolving conversation. This makes a classroom not just a place to learn about literature, but a living space where meaning itself is constantly being negotiated. In this session, we have explored the diverse dimensions of reader response criticism and its related influences, beginning with the theoretical foundations of American pragmatism, moving through the works of Wolfgang Iser, Hans Robert Jauss, and Stanley Fish, and examining the contributions of Louise Rosenblatt, Harold Bloom, M.H. Abrams, and David Bleich. Together, these voices illustrate how meaning emerges through the dynamic interaction between text and reader, shaped by history, psychology, and interpretive communities. In our next session, we will turn our attention to psychoanalytic criticism, delving into the ideas of Freud, Jung, Lacan, and others to uncover the hidden forces that shape literature and human experience.